Hey guys, tonight we slip back into a time when the streets smell faintly of wood smoke and freshly baked bread, and the air hums with the clang of blacksmith hammers and church bells. It's the late Middle Ages, and you're about to wander cobbled lanes where fortunes are born in places you'd never expect. A draft curls through your tunic. Somewhere nearby, a market crier yells the price of wheat, and you realize, here, the difference between survival and prosperity can be a single harvest. You probably won't survive this, at least not without some sharp thinking and a little luck. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you are right now and what time it is there. I love seeing how far this little bedtime caravan travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The dirt clings to your boots as you trudge along a narrow road lined with hedgerows, a basket of onions digging into your shoulder. Your family's land isn't much. Half an acre of rye, a small vegetable patch, a cow that's probably older than you are. For most peasants, life is just this: work from dawn to dusk, pay your dues to the Lord, and pray nothing floods, freezes, or festers. But every so often, someone in your village manages to climb out of that rut, and tonight, you're going to watch exactly how it happens. First, there's the bumper harvest trick. You've been blessed with a summer that's warm and wet enough to swell the grains, yet dry enough to keep mildew away. Historians still argue whether medieval farming was more luck than skill, but in a good year, a farmer with a few extra sacks of wheat could take them to market when prices are high and tuck away a tidy profit. That profit isn't going into a savings account. You're thinking goats, more seed, maybe even renting an extra strip of land from the abbey. In a place where most people are barely scraping by, even a small surplus gives you breathing room. And then there are side hustles. You wouldn't call them that in the 14th century, of course, but you know the value of making and selling something beyond crops. One clever neighbor has started brewing ale, not for the tavern, but for travelers along the road. The trick? Using honey for sweetness when barley is scarce. Turns out passing pilgrims will pay extra for a sweeter brew. Another family raises geese for feathers and meat. Goose quills for writing are in demand in the growing number of schools and churches. You might think your neighbors are just feeding the clergy's letter-writing habit, but they're really feeding their own prosperity. You also notice the occasional peasant who becomes a small-scale merchant. Maybe it's a woman who buys flax from several households, spins it into linen, and sells it in the town square. Or a man who works in the fields in summer, but heads to the coast in winter to help in the herring trade. Herring salted in barrels is the medieval equivalent of a global commodity. Easy to store, easy to sell far away. One season in the right port can net enough to improve your house, pay off debts, and even put you in the Lord's good books. It's not just what you produce, it's how you network. You wouldn't call it LinkedIn, but the medieval version is every bit as strategic. You meet the reeve for a quiet chat about leasing an abandoned plot. You help mend a traveling merchant's wagon wheel, and next time he's in town, he pays you in salt, worth its weight in silver when winter sets in. Even gossip is currency. Knowing that a neighboring village had a poor harvest means you can sell your surplus there for twice the price. But climbing up from peasant life also means taking risks. Some people speculate, buying grain when it's cheap in summer, storing it, and selling in the hungry months before the next harvest. It's dangerous. A mouse infestation or a sudden glut in the market could leave you with nothing. Yet if you time it right, the return can be astonishing. You're basically playing the 14th century stock market, except your stocks can sprout mold. Quirky as it sounds, animals sometimes play a starring role in a peasant's leap to wealth. There's the shepherd who trains a dog so good at herding that neighboring farmers pay to borrow it. Or the family who breeds cats, not for cuteness, but for pest control in granaries. You'd be surprised how much a merchant will pay to keep rats out of his precious grain. And then there's the weather, always the fickle kingmaker. A string of mild winters can mean more livestock surviving, which means more manure for the fields, which means more crops, which means more money. But one freak frost can wipe that all away. That's why some peasants start diversifying, keeping bees for honey and wax, raising herbs for medicine, or learning a skilled trade like carpentry on the side. Wax from bees can be sold to churches for candles. Medicinal herbs can be hawked to townsfolk who believe in their healing powers. Still, no matter how clever you are, your fate is tangled in the web of feudal obligations. The Lord expects rents in kind or coin. The church expects tithes. And the crown, well, the crown always seems to find a new tax. Which means the peasants who truly get ahead are the ones who can negotiate, skirt, or occasionally charm their way around these obligations. Maybe you offer your Lord a cut of your side business in exchange for lighter rents. Maybe you bring the local priest a fine goose every Christmas, so he overlooks that missing tenth of your grain tithe. The thing is, wealth at this level is relative. You're not buying a castle or commissioning tapestries. You're buying time. Time to rest in winter instead of taking day labor in the Lord's forest. Time to send your son to learn letters in the monastery school. Time to patch your roof before it collapses instead of after. And as you pass by the village tavern tonight, you see the proof. The brewer with the sweet ale is laughing with a merchant from the next town over. The woman who spins linen is counting coins by candlelight. The shepherd with the miracle dog is already halfway to tipsy, promising to show you a trick with a whistle that will make sheep march in a perfect line. These people started just like you, but with a little surplus, a side hustle, and a few well-placed relationships, they've nudged themselves up a rung on the ladder. You can smell roasted meat in the air, a luxury you haven't tasted since last midsummer. Somewhere down the road, the sound of a lute drifts out into the night. You realize that in this world, wealth isn't just gold in a pouch. It's being able to afford the good bread with the crunchy crust, the ale that makes you smile, the firewood that burns long into the night. And maybe, just maybe, it's having the freedom to dream beyond tomorrow's chores. You leave the muddy lane behind and step into the part of town that smells faintly of beeswax and fresh-cut leather. The noise here isn't the farmyard chatter, you know. It's a hammer tapping in rhythmic bursts, the hiss of hot iron meeting water, the rasp of a plane over wood. Welcome to the world of guilds, where work is more than just survival. It's a ticket to status, security, and if you play it right, serious wealth. Guilds are everywhere now in the late Middle Ages, and if you're lucky enough to join one, you've just entered the medieval equivalent of a closed, high-paying club. Picture it. You're an apprentice, barely old enough to shave, eyes wide as your master shows you how to temper a blade so it rings clear when struck. The work is hard, the hours long, and you're earning almost nothing. But you're gaining something more valuable: membership in a tightly knit group that controls who can sell what, where, and at what price. Historians still argue whether guilds were primarily about protecting quality or protecting profits. But either way, they make their members rich. Take the Goldsmiths Guild. These are not humble village artisans. They're the ones making intricate chalices for cathedrals and jeweled brooches for dukes. You might imagine them as solitary geniuses hunched over workbenches. But in reality, they're part of a collective that sets minimum prices and drives out competition. No membership. You're shut out. That means the people inside the guild can charge handsomely for their work, and customers have no choice but to pay. And then there's the political angle. A master in a powerful guild might also sit on the town council, shaping laws that benefit his trade. Maybe a new rule says only locally made cloth can be sold at market. Good news if you're a weaver in the guild, bad news if you're an outsider. Sometimes the favoritism is shameless. One tanner complains about a rival's low-quality hides, and suddenly that rival's stall is shut down until further notice. You'd call it corruption today. They call it maintaining standards. Quirky as it sounds, guilds even control the colors you can use. In some cities, only members of the Dyers Guild can legally produce certain shades, like the deep, rich scarlet made from imported cochineal. That shade is a status symbol, and the monopoly means dyers can charge almost anything for it. You've seen more than one wealthy merchant's wife swishing around in scarlet skirts that cost more than a peasant's cottage. For a young worker, the path to wealth starts with mastering the craft. Years as an apprentice teach you the skills. Then, as a journeyman, you travel from town to town, working in different workshops, picking up tricks of the trade. Journeymen often sleep in cramped lofts above the shop and eat whatever the master's wife serves, but they're gathering something priceless: knowledge of markets, connections in other cities, and sometimes whispers of trade secrets. Once you've saved enough, you submit your masterpiece to the guild, a single, flawless item that proves you're ready to be a master. Maybe it's a chest with hidden compartments, or a sword so perfectly balanced it almost floats in your hand. If the guild approves, you get your own workshop, your own apprentices, and most importantly, the right to profit. That's when the real money starts. You can take on big commissions. A merchant wants matching silver goblets for his son's wedding feast. The cathedral needs a new bronze bell that will carry its sound across the valley. You set your price, and the guild backs you up. Even better, you can join in on cooperative ventures, pooling resources with other masters to buy rare materials in bulk, like lapis lazuli for ultramarine paint or fine English wool for weaving. Guilds don't just protect your income, they can help you weather disaster. If your workshop burns down, the guild may chip in to rebuild. If you're injured, they might support your family until you recover. It's a safety net in an age when most people live one bad harvest away from ruin. And because members often leave bequests to the guild in their wills, the coffers grow steadily over time, giving the whole group more clout. There's also a social side. Guild feasts are legendary. Long tables groaning under roast meats, jugs of ale, musicians playing until the candles burn low. At these gatherings, Business deals are struck over platters of spiced pies. Apprentices get noticed by influential masters, and rivalries are smoothed over, at least until morning. It's like a medieval networking event, except with more mutton and fewer business cards. But it's not all smooth sailing. Competition between guilds can get fierce. In one town, the Bakers' Guild feuds with the Millers' Guild over who controls grain prices. In another, the stonemasons push to limit how many new apprentices the carpenters can take, fearing too many wooden buildings will mean fewer stone commissions. And then there are the outsiders, the unlicensed craftsmen who set up shop without guild approval. Sometimes they're fined. Sometimes their goods are confiscated. Sometimes, mysteriously, their workshops just stop operating. You can guess why. And here's the thing. Guild power can extend far beyond the workshop walls. In some cities, guilds collectively form a militia, defending the town during conflict. In others, they influence which candidates get elected to mayor. The richest masters can even loan money to nobles, subtly flipping the power dynamic. Imagine a duke owing a goldsmith. Now, the goldsmith isn't just a craftsman, he's a creditor with leverage. One particularly quirky guild rule: some bakers' guilds require you to make a charity loaf with every batch, a slightly larger loaf given to the poor. On paper, it's about generosity. In practice, it's a way to show the public that guild members are benevolent providers. And yes, it also keeps customers loyal. So, as you wander back out into the street, past the candle makers and the tailor's stalls, you realize something. The guild system doesn't just make people rich. It creates an entire social ladder inside the city. At the top are the master craftsmen, living in tall, narrow houses with carved beams and glass windows. Below them, the journeymen, ambitious and restless. Below them, the apprentices, dreaming of the day they can hang their own sign above a shop door. And far below that, well, the customers. Wealth here isn't about owning land or collecting taxes. It's about controlling access. Access to skills, to markets, to materials. If you're inside the guild, you can climb high. If you're outside, you might as well be shouting your prices into the wind. And that's why the masters walk these streets with the easy confidence of people who know the game is rigged. And they're the ones holding the rigging. You hitch your bundle tighter over your shoulder and fall into step behind a line of pack mules jingling with bells. Their hooves clatter on the cobblestones as they head toward the city gate, where the smell of tarred rope, dried fish, and spiced wine drifts in from the market square. This is the world of merchants on the move, people who seem to spend more time on roads and rivers than in their own beds, chasing the goods that make the late Middle Ages hum with possibility. You wouldn't call them wanderers. These traders are calculated opportunists. They know exactly where to go and when, which ports are flush with saffron, which mountain passes are safe from early snow. Historians still argue whether medieval trade was more about daring exploration or stubborn routine, but there's no question the wealth comes from being in the right place with the right goods at the right moment. Take the cloth merchants of Flanders. In the cold, gray light of dawn, you watch them oversee bales of fine wool from England being dyed, cut, and sewn in Bruges before being sent off to Italy, where rich families will pay fortunes for them. It's not just the cloth. They're trading in the reputation of Flanders itself, a name synonymous with quality. And the best merchants are masters at branding centuries before the word existed. They know that if a noblewoman in Florence wants a gown from Bruges, she'll pay triple for the label. Then there's the spice trade, equal parts lucrative and dangerous. A pinch of cinnamon in your mulled wine tonight probably traveled thousands of miles from Ceylon, changing hands a dozen times. Merchants sail from Venice to Alexandria, deal with Muslim intermediaries, then haul their fragrant cargo up through the Alps to the kitchens of Europe's elite. The margins are enormous. A chest of pepper might cost a few coins in the East and sell for a small fortune in Paris. And if you're picturing pepper as just table seasoning, remember, it's also medicine, preservative, and status symbol. In some places, peppercorns are so valuable, they're counted out one by one. Of course, not every merchant deals in luxuries. Grain, salt, wine, and iron are the staples of the medieval trade network. Salt in particular is like gold in granular form. Without it, meat spoils, fish rots, and armies go hungry. Merchants who control salt routes, like the famous Via Salaria in Italy, control the lifeline of entire regions. You've heard of more than one war sparked over salt rights, and you suspect a few of the shortages are suspiciously well timed. Quirky as it may seem, some merchants make their fortunes by specializing in the utterly ordinary, like barrel hoops. Yes, those wooden circles that hold casks together. A clever trader realizes that wine, beer, and salted fish all need barrels, and barrels need hoops. By buying cheap iron in one town, having it forged into hoops in another, and selling it to coopers along busy river routes, he quietly becomes rich without ever touching a single drop of wine or catching a single fish. The life of a merchant is full of small, calculated gambles. Do you risk the sea crossing in late autumn when storms are brewing? Or do you take the slower overland route through mountain passes where bandits lie in wait? Do you invest in a cargo of olive oil, betting the next winter will be mild enough that people will splurge on luxuries? These decisions are as nerve-wracking as rolling dice, except the stakes are your livelihood. To manage the risks, merchants form partnerships. You might put up half the money for a voyage while another partner handles the ship and a third manages the sale in the destination market. If the ship sinks, you all share the loss. If it arrives safely, you all share the profit. Some even pool resources into merchant companies, early ancestors of joint stock corporations. Your day on the road with these traders is a blur of negotiation. At a roadside inn, you watch a wine merchant trade a barrel of last year's vintage for bolts of dyed linen. In the next town, that linen will be swapped for iron tools, which will be sold to a distant mining village for raw ore. It's a constant dance of swapping, upgrading, and repositioning goods until every ounce of value has been squeezed out of them. Merchants also know the value of information. A whispered tip that the Duke's army is moving north might mean a sudden need for horseshoes and salted meat in that region. A rumor of famine in a distant valley means grain prices there will soar. Keeping your ear to the ground and knowing which whispers to trust can be as valuable as the goods in your cart. And sometimes a merchant's wealth comes from being the bridge between worlds. You watch one Italian trader in the port of Barcelona speaking in a rapid blend of Catalan, Arabic, and a smattering of French, smoothing deals between Muslim spice dealers and Christian cloth merchants. He's not just moving goods, he's moving trust across cultural and religious boundaries that most people never cross. That's worth a premium. At night, you camp by the side of the road, the smell of smoked fish drifting from a nearby fire. Merchants huddle over wax tablets, tallying sales and expenses by candlelight. One man chuckles as he recounts how he sold a shipment of rare eastern walnuts to a wealthy abbot. Walnuts that, in truth, grew a few valleys over, but were dressed up in imported baskets and exotic stories. Marketing, it seems, is timeless. In the morning, you pass a convoy heading the other way, horses laden with wine casks, mules with sacks of grain, and a cart piled high with brightly painted pottery. The drivers wave, and you realize these routes are the veins of a vast living body called commerce. If you know how to move with its pulse, you can grow rich. If you misstep, if you arrive with the wrong goods at the wrong time, you can end up broke, stranded, or worse. Wealth here isn't about hoarding gold in a chest. It's about constant motion, turning goods into coins, coins into goods, and always being a step ahead of both your competitors and the seasons. And as you trudge toward the next town, the mule bells jingling like the soundtrack of opportunity, you wonder if maybe, just maybe, your own fortune is waiting over the next hill. You duck into a narrow, timber-framed building that smells faintly of wax, ink, and something metallic. Copper, maybe. The room is dim, lit only by a few sputtering candles, and the quiet is so deep you can hear the scratching of quills and the soft clink of coins being weighed. You've stepped into the new nerve center of medieval wealth, the counting house. The bankers here don't look like the farmers or merchants you've been following. Their hands are soft, their eyes sharp. They dress in good wool and keep their ledgers under lock and key. They are the keepers of a strange new kind of fortune, one built not on grain, salt, or spices, but on promises. Historians still argue whether banking in the late Middle Ages was born out of necessity or sheer cunning. But either way, it changed the game. Merchants moving goods across borders quickly learned that carrying gold was a dangerous invitation to thieves. So, they turned to bankers who could issue letters of credit, pieces of parchment that said, in elegant Latin, "Pay this man when he reaches Florence," or "Pay his agent in Bruges." It's the medieval equivalent of a bank transfer, and it meant you could travel light, but still move large sums. Some of the first to master this art were the Italian merchant banking families, names like Bardi, Peruzzi, and later Medici. Their operations spread like spiderwebs, linking major cities with networks of agents. You could deposit florins in Genoa and withdraw ducats in Constantinople, all without touching a single coin along the way. The bankers made money by charging fees and by lending, often to kings and popes, which was both profitable and extremely risky. In one corner, you watch a clerk carefully weigh silver coins on a small brass balance. Every coin is checked for clipping. When people shave tiny bits of precious metal from the edges, too much clipping, and the coin's value drops. The banker records each deposit with a flourish in a thick ledger, a tool of power in its own right. Double-entry bookkeeping, a method refined in this period, allows bankers to track credits and debits side by side. It's so effective that merchants and governments alike adopt it, and it will still be in use centuries later. But the real magic isn't just moving money, it's multiplying it. A banker lends to a nobleman who needs to outfit an army, charging interest cleverly disguised as fees to dodge church laws against usury. The nobleman spends that money on armor, weapons, and food, which puts coins into the hands of craftsmen and merchants, many of whom keep accounts at the same bank. The banker earns from both ends of the transaction. Quirky as it sounds, some bankers also dabble in currency speculation. Because different cities and regions mint coins with varying silver or gold content, a savvy banker might buy up coins in one place, ship them elsewhere, and exchange them for a profit. It's not glamorous work. You're basically playing an elaborate game of medieval spot the difference. But it can yield tidy sums. The counting house is also where politics and finance mingle. Behind a closed door, you overhear a quiet negotiation between a banker and a city official. The banker offers a loan to fund repairs on the city walls. In return, he'll collect a portion of market tolls for the next decade. It's a win-win, unless the city falls to an enemy, in which case the banker's investment is gone. But these men seem comfortable with risk. After all, fortunes are rarely made by playing it safe. One clerk shows you a stack of sealed letters, orders from wealthy clients instructing the bank to pay certain sums to specific people. These letters aren't just financial instruments, they're tickets to trust. In a world where a thief can take your purse in seconds, the ability to move wealth invisibly is revolutionary. And if you think this sounds suspiciously modern, you're right. Swap the parchment for digital code, and you'd be looking at an online wire transfer. Of course, banking is not without its perils. You've heard of entire houses collapsing when kings default on their debts. The Bardi and Peruzzi families, for instance, lent enormous sums to Edward III of England to fund his wars, only to be ruined when he simply didn't pay them back. No matter how sophisticated your ledgers, you can't make a monarch cough up coin he doesn't have or refuses to give. Still, the allure is undeniable. The richest bankers live in lavish houses, their walls hung with tapestries, their tables laden with fine wine and roasted meats. They sponsor chapels, commission paintings, and marry into noble families. Wealth here is invisible until it's not, until it's turned into stone, silk, and status. One particularly strange side hustle? Pawn banking. In some cities, bankers or moneylenders keep a sideline in lending against pledged goods, rings, cloaks, tools. If the borrower defaults, the banker sells the item. It's a way to profit off both the rich, who pawn jewels to raise quick cash, and the poor, who pawn tools to survive the winter. As you step back into the street, blinking at the daylight, you realize you've just witnessed something different from farming or trading goods. This is wealth made from numbers, from trust, from the idea that money can be in two places at once. It's abstract, but it's powerful. And as long as the ink is dry and the seals are unbroken, it can cross mountains, seas, and even borders without ever touching the ground. The road tilts upward now, the air sharpening with the scent of pine and hearth smoke. Ahead, on a rise above the river, you see a stone manor house bristling with turrets and banners. A sure sign you're stepping into the realm of noble wealth. This isn't the world of hauling bales of wool or counting coins in a ledger. Here, fortunes are old, tied to land, bloodlines, and the fine art of turning power into profit. From the moment you pass through the gates, you feel it. The gravel crunches under your boots. Servants in livery glide past, carrying baskets of apples, armfuls of firewood, bolts of fine cloth. Nobles in the late Middle Ages hold land like other people hold breath. It's the foundation of their existence. Historians still argue whether medieval nobility earned most of their wealth through direct production or through extraction. But there is no debate about their main advantage. They own the soil beneath everyone's feet. If you farm on a noble's land, a portion of your harvest goes straight to their granary. If you sell goods at the village market, they take a cut through tolls. If you fish in the river, you pay for the right. Multiply that by dozens of villages, and you start to see how an estate can feed both bellies and coffers without the lord lifting a plow. But land is only the base layer. Nobles also trade in marriage like merchants trade in spices. A well-placed match can merge estates, cement alliances, and bring dowries that make your head spin. Picture this. A young lord marries the daughter of a wealthy count, instantly doubling his holdings and gaining access to lucrative trade rights in her family's territory. The wedding feast alone might cost more than a merchant makes in a decade, but the payoff lasts generations. And then there are war spoils. A noble with the right connections can turn conflict into windfall. Serving as a commander under the king isn't just about loyalty. It's a chance to claim ransoms for captured enemies, seize valuable armor and weapons, and sometimes even be granted conquered land. The ransom of a single wealthy knight could be enough to refurbish an entire castle. Quirky as it sounds, nobles also dabble in what you might call prestige farming. They maintain elaborate deer parks, falconries, and fish ponds, not because they need the food, but because these displays signal power and refinement. But they're not just for show. Exotic animals and rare fish can be gifted or sold to other nobles at impressive prices. You've heard of a baron trading a pure white peacock to a neighboring lord in exchange for an entire plot of woodland. The manor's great hall is where you see the real machinery of noble wealth in motion. Stewards track rents, oversee repairs, and handle disputes between tenants. Lawyers draft charters to secure privileges from the crown. Nobles understand that paper and seals can be as potent as swords. A royal grant of monopoly rights over a river crossing, for example, can turn a quiet ford into a gold mine of toll collection. Of course, not all noble wealth is inherited. Some families rise from comparative obscurity by loyal service to the king, military victories, clever diplomacy, or just being in the right place when a rival falls from grace. Land grants and titles can be handed out like rewards, and with them come the rents, rights, and revenues that make noble life possible. Inside the private solar, you glimpse shelves stacked with ledgers. Yes, even nobles track income and expenses. They record rents from tenants, income from mills and breweries, and the profits from selling timber or wool. Some even invest in merchant ventures, providing capital for ships or caravans in exchange for a share of the profits. It's an elegant way to grow wealth without setting foot outside their own hall. And nobles are masters of symbolic spending. Building a new wing on the castle, commissioning a chapel, or hosting an enormous feast isn't just indulgence. It's a public statement of stability and strength. The more you appear to have, the more loyalty you inspire, and the easier it becomes to maintain your grip on power. It's the medieval version of a social media flex, only with actual battlements. Still, noble fortunes aren't invincible. A bad harvest, a costly war, or a political misstep can strain even the richest estate. Maintaining retinues of knights and servants is expensive, and debts to bankers or merchants can quietly pile up. That's why smart nobles diversify, investing in town property, securing monopolies, or marrying into merchant families with liquid wealth. On your way out, you pass the stables, where sleek horses stamp and snort. A groom whispers about the Lord's latest acquisition, a destrier from Spain, bought for a price that could feed a village for a year. It's both a luxury and an investment. In war, a fine horse can mean the difference between victory and death. And in peace, it's a mark of distinction. By the time you're outside the gates again, the sun is low, painting the stone walls gold. You understand now that noble riches are a tapestry woven from land, lineage, loyalty, and the occasional opportunistic grab. And while merchants and bankers may grow rich in their lifetimes, noble wealth is designed to endure generation after generation, like the castles themselves, weathering storms while the banners still fly. The smell hits you before the view does. Fresh bread from a street baker, mingled with the tang of tanned leather, roasted chestnuts, and the faint ammonia of dye vats. You round a bend, and there it is, the city. Not a sleepy market village, but a booming, noisy, elbow-to-elbow place where stone walls barely contain the energy inside. In the late Middle Ages, cities are like magnets, pulling in anyone with ambition, desperation, or something to sell. And for the lucky, or the cunning, they're where rural anonymity can turn into urban wealth. The first thing you notice is how vertical it all feels. Houses climb high, with wooden upper stories jutting out over the street. Laundry flaps between windows. Merchants lean out of doorways, hawking goods to passers-by. Every sound, wagon wheels, hammer blows, bargaining voices, echoes between the narrow lanes, making the place feel twice as alive. Historians still argue whether the real engine of medieval urban prosperity was trade, craft production, or sheer population density. But for you, it's obvious. It's all three. The city is a giant hive, and every bee is either working, buying, selling, or plotting their next move. You stop by a baker's stall. The bread here isn't the coarse rye you know from the countryside. This is white bread, soft and warm, made from sifted flour. The price is higher, but so is the status. Buying it tells the neighbors you've made it. The baker explains that his wealth isn't just from baking, it's from being part of the Baker's Guild, owning his own ovens and controlling which streets get deliveries. If you want to be rich in a city, you don't just make things, you own the means to make them and the right to sell them. A few streets over, you pass a row of shops specializing in imported goods, silks from the East, glassware from Venice, carved ivory combs. The shopkeepers aren't just traders. They're curators of desire, displaying goods to tempt wealthy townsfolk and nobles alike. Their secret is location. Rent on this street is high, but the foot traffic guarantees customers with deep purses. Quirky as it sounds, some fortunes here come from services you wouldn't expect. There's a man whose only business is renting out finely painted banners for festivals. Another makes a living as a professional mourner, hired to wail convincingly at funerals. In a place this crowded, specialization isn't a luxury, it's survival. The real difference between city and countryside wealth is speed. In the village, you wait for the harvest to sell grain or for the slow growth of livestock to bring profit. In the city, you can turn a deal in a single day, buying cheap in the morning market, selling at a markup in the afternoon, then reinvesting immediately. A clever trader might buy a cartload of onions at sunrise and have enough profit by sunset to dine on spiced lamb. And here's the other thing. Cities run on credit. Not just the banker's kind, but everyday trust. The cobbler will give you a new pair of shoes today if you promise to pay next market day. The tavern will feed you now, knowing you'll settle your tab after your next sale. These informal loans keep goods and money flowing, and if you're good for your word, you can scale your business faster than your actual cash reserves would suggest. Still, the city isn't an equal opportunity playground. Those with connections, family already in trade, ties to a guild, or friendships with officials start a rung or two higher. But even an outsider can climb. You hear of a woman who arrived with nothing but a skill for weaving narrow ribbons. Now she supplies the finest hat makers in town. A tanner's apprentice becomes a master after inventing a faster way to cure hides. Urban wealth rewards skill and timing, sometimes more than birth. At the heart of it all is the market square. It's part stock exchange, part social hub, part open-air theater. You watch as two men argue over the price of herring while a street performer juggles knives to draw a crowd near his accomplice's pickpocketing. You realize that in this chaos, fortunes are being made, some honest, some not. Over time, certain neighborhoods develop reputations. One street becomes the go-to place for goldsmiths, another for spice sellers, another for booksellers. If you can afford to rent or buy property there, you're tapping into an existing stream of customers. It's not just a shop. It's a billboard that says, "I'm part of the best." City life also gives you something the countryside never could: proximity to power. Town councils, merchant courts, and royal representatives all operate here. A chance encounter at a feast could lead to a lucrative contract, supplying bread to the city garrison or wine to the mayor's table. In the country, you might meet the reeve. Here, you might meet the man who sets trade policy for the entire region. And yet, the risks are as big as the rewards. Fires can sweep through in hours, wiping out whole districts. Plagues can empty streets overnight. A shift in trade routes can turn a bustling port into a backwater. That's why successful urbanites often diversify, keeping one foot in city trade and another in rural land or long-distance merchant ventures. By sunset, the city glows in torchlight. Taverns fill with laughter and the smell of roast goose. Street vendors call out their last sales of the day. Somewhere above, on a high balcony, a merchant counts coins while looking down at the restless streets, already planning tomorrow's deals. And as you make your way to a crowded inn, you realize this place has a heartbeat all its own, and if you match its rhythm, it can make you rich faster than anywhere else in the medieval world. You wake to the deep clang of a bell, 7 slow strikes rolling across the rooftops like ripples in a pond. In the city, time isn't just the sun's position in the sky. It's organized, enforced, and yes, monetized. That bell isn't only for prayers. It's also a schedule keeper for guilds, apprentices, and merchants. And in the late Middle Ages, guilds aren't just trade clubs. They're wealth machines with their own rules, politics, and gatekeeping. You head toward a street where the smell of sawdust hangs heavy, the rhythm of mallets on chisels echoing from every doorway. Here, the Carpenters Guild controls every plank, beam, and joint that goes into the city's buildings. It's not enough to be a talented carpenter. If you're not a guild member, you're a nobody, legally barred from selling your work. Inside the guild hall, members gather over long wooden tables, their benches worn smooth by decades of elbows. They discuss prices, quality standards and who's in and who's out. Historians still argue whether guilds truly protected workers or simply limited competition to protect profits. But either way, they kept wealth circulating among members. Apprentices paid for training, journeymen worked their way up, and masters, well, masters controlled the real money. They could hire others, set prices, and influence city politics. The quirky part? Some guilds had initiation rituals that feel halfway between a frat party and a secret society meeting. You might have to drink an absurd quantity of spiced wine, recite the mysteries of your craft, or present a masterpiece that demonstrated your skills. Literally the origin of the term. Fail, and you're out. Succeed, and you join a centuries-old network that can guarantee steady work and clients for life. You pass the goldsmith's district, where windows gleam with rings, chalices, and delicate chains. Goldsmiths often double as bankers, holding deposits and lending money. Their guild ensures purity of metal, but it also gives members an inside line on investment opportunities. A clever goldsmith might know weeks in advance about a noble wedding and stock up on pearls before prices soar. Some guilds go beyond controlling production. They handle charity for sick members, host feasts on saints' days, and even maintain armed guards for their halls. In a sense, a powerful guild is a mini-government, and its leaders, often wealthy masters, can rival city officials in influence. For an ambitious person, climbing a guild's ranks can be faster than climbing the city council ladder, but guild life isn't all profit and power. It's also fierce politics. Masters protect their positions, and newcomers sometimes spend decades waiting for a spot to open. Journeymen might grumble about being underpaid, yet fear rocking the boat and losing guild protection. Still, the protection is real. If you're in the Weavers' Guild and someone tries to undercut you with cheaper cloth, the guild can fine or even ban the offender from the market. Then there's the fun fact that guilds often sponsor pageants and parades, turning their economic dominance into cultural prestige. Imagine a row of bakers marching in spotless white aprons, tossing small rolls to children, while coopers roll massive barrels through the streets just to show off craftsmanship. These spectacles weren't just for entertainment. They were marketing, reinforcing the guild's brand in the eyes of customers. Not all trades were guild-bound, though. Some free professions, like fishmongers or peddlers, operated outside formal guild control. They could be more nimble, but they lacked the political muscle guilds could bring to bear. A peddler might strike gold with a hot product one season, only to be run out of business the next by a guild that claimed the trade fell under its domain. If you're smart, you realize that guild membership isn't just about making things. It's about access to markets, to information, and to protection. With those three in your pocket, you can plan bigger moves, importing rare woods from distant ports, investing in a merchant voyage, or even buying property in the city's most coveted streets. The master carpenter you meet tells you that his fortune really took off not when he became a master, but when he became an officer in the guild. That position meant he could influence contracts for city projects, cathedrals, bridges, and civic halls, and steer the work toward his own shop. You can't help but notice the quiet pride in his voice, the satisfaction of someone who's playing a bigger game than just selling tables. By late afternoon, the guild bells ring again, this time signaling the end of the workday. The streets flood with craftsmen, apprentices, and merchants heading toward taverns, some wearing badges of their guilds on cloaks or caps. You see the camaraderie, but also the subtle hierarchy in who sits where, who pays for the first round, and who's greeted with deference. As you sip an ale, you realize that in the medieval city, guilds are both ladders and walls. They can lift you to wealth, but only if you're on the inside, and once you are, you'll fight just as hard to keep that wall standing. You're jolted awake by the thump of a heavy ledger slamming shut, a sound less dramatic than a sword clash, but in this age, just as powerful. The air in the cramped office smells faintly of wax and parchment dust, and you can feel the faint rasp of rough paper as your fingers brush the desk. Here, in this dimly lit corner of the city, you watch the real revolution of the late Middle Ages unfold, not in steel or fire, but in paper and ink. At first glance, it's not much to look at. Thick folios bound in leather, scrawled with lines of looping script. But these aren't mere notes. They're contracts, credit notes, promissory letters, and above all, the prized double-entry ledgers that allow merchants to track both what they own and what they owe. It's a deceptively simple idea. 2 columns, one for debits, one for credits. But it changes everything. For the first time, a merchant can look at a page and see, in one neat balance, whether they're actually making money or just pretending to. Historians still argue whether double-entry bookkeeping was invented in Italy or if it evolved gradually from earlier accounting methods in the Arab world. But one thing's certain, by the late 14th century, Italian city-states like Venice, Genoa, and Florence were using it to dominate trade. You find yourself hunched over a Florentine merchant's ledger, marveling at the columns of numbers neatly totaling to zero. A quirky tidbit you can't unsee. Some merchants decorate their ledgers with doodles in the margins. A ship, a sprig of rosemary, even tiny sketches of the goods they're tracking. Maybe it's boredom. Maybe it's pride. Either way, it makes the documents feel oddly personal. You half expect to see a "Have a nice day" scrawled in Latin. The real magic of paper, though, is that it untethers money from coins. Suddenly, you don't need to lug around chests of silver to settle a deal. You can issue a bill of exchange, a promise to pay, redeemable in another city. A merchant in Bruges can buy fine wool from England and pay for it in Venice, without a single coin crossing the channel. Of course, trust is everything. A piece of paper from an unknown trader is just kindling. One from a respected house is as good as gold. You step outside to see a money changer's stall, its counter covered with different coins from across Europe, some clipped, some pristine. The money changer scribbles figures on a scrap of parchment, calculating the fair exchange. His clients aren't just travelers. Merchants use him to convert their paper promises into local currency. The flow of paper makes trade faster, but it also creates risks. Letters can be forged. Debts can be denied. That's why these transactions happen under the watchful eyes of notaries, whose seal pressed into warm wax gives the paper its power. In the back of the stall, you catch a whispered negotiation. 2 merchants are arranging credit for a spice shipment, pepper from the Levant. One will front the cost, the other will handle the sale, and the profits will be split. They're not handing over coins now. They're exchanging signed agreements. In a way, the spices are already sold before they even reach the docks. You notice that paper technology doesn't just belong to merchants. City governments are keeping meticulous records. tax rolls, property deeds, even fines for public drunkenness. Paper makes bureaucracy more efficient, and efficiency means more revenue. The richer the city, the more it can invest in infrastructure, defense, or, let's be honest, lavish banquets for its officials. But here's the thing, not everyone trusts paper. In the tavern that evening, a grizzled trader tells you about a time he accepted a bill of exchange from a respectable merchant in Pisa, only to discover the man's business had collapsed by the time payment was due. "Better the weight in silver in my own hand," he growls into his mug. You can see his point. Paper can travel faster than news, and in that gap lies danger. Still, you sense the shift. Paper is quietly breaking old boundaries. It's allowing long-distance partnerships between people who may never meet. It's making it possible to grow a business beyond the reach of a single city's market. And it's giving clever people new tools to hide wealth from prying tax collectors, folded inside contracts no one else can read. By the time the candle burns low, you realize that in this new paper-driven world, literacy is wealth. If you can read, write, and count, you can make deals without ever touching the goods yourself. You can turn promises into profit. And maybe, just maybe, you can sleep at night knowing your fortune is written down, safe between two covers, even if it weighs less than a loaf of bread. You wake to the muffled clang of a church bell, and when you step into the street, you notice something odd. There's a shop that seems to have no competition, none at all, and yet it's overflowing with customers. The owner, a stout man with a velvet cap, barely glances up as his assistants scurry to weigh sacks of salt and roll barrels of wine out the door. You quickly learn why. He's the only one allowed to sell these goods in the city. It's called a monopoly, and here in the late Middle Ages, it often comes wrapped in parchment and sealed with wax. Kings, dukes, or city councils grant exclusive rights to individuals or guilds to control certain trades, whether it's brewing beer, ferrying passengers across a river, or importing a coveted spice. These charters aren't free. They're usually bought with generous gifts to the right people, though no one calls it bribery out loud. Historians still argue whether such monopolies really boosted a region's economy or just lined a few lucky pockets. What's clear is that, for the people who held them, it was a license to print money. You can't help but smirk at the thought, if you controlled the only bakery in town, you could charge more for your bread and everyone would still have to smile and thank you. A quirky little tidbit. Some monopolies were hilariously specific. There's a record of one medieval town granting exclusive rights to sell eel pies during Lent. Imagine staking your family fortune on the hope that people never get tired of eel pie. In another case, a single family controlled the dye trade for 3 generations simply because their ancestor had a knack for keeping the purple from fading. Not all monopolies are permanent. Some are auctioned off annually with fierce bidding wars. You picture the scene. Wealthy merchants gathering in a smoky hall, eyes narrowing as the bidding climbs. In some cases, rival bidders form alliances just to keep one aggressive competitor from winning everything. You can feel the tension, the quiet calculations. How much can you pay now and still turn a profit later? But monopolies aren't always granted by rulers. Sometimes they're self-made through trade networks. If you have a cousin in Alexandria willing to ship saffron only to you, you've effectively locked down that market in your city. Or If your guild controls the only bridge across the river, you can collect tolls and control traffic without a single royal decree. Of course, monopolies breed resentment. You overhear grumbles in the market from the small-time traders who can't get a foot in the door. It's not fair, they say, and you can't deny the point. But power protects itself. The monopoly holder might sponsor city feasts, pay for repairs to the cathedral, or lend money to the ruler, acts that keep their position secure. In the evening, you visit a merchant who holds the lucrative salt monopoly for the region. His dining hall is lined with tapestries, the table set with silver plates. Over roasted goose, he tells you with a wink that the salt itself isn't the real treasure. It's the control. If they want salt, they come to me, and they always want salt. You suspect he sleeps soundly, knowing no one can undercut him without facing heavy fines. Or worse, walking home, you realize monopolies are like invisible walls in the economy. To the wealthy, they're protective fortresses. To everyone else, they're barriers. And if you're lucky enough to be inside those walls, your fortune is almost inevitable, as long as you keep the right friends and the right parchment sealed in your chest. The air smells faintly of smoke and metal, and you feel the vibration before you see the cause. Armored horses clattering down the cobbled road, their riders fresh from a border skirmish. Behind them comes a cart piled high with barrels, crates, and something glinting under burlap. This, you quickly realize, is where fortunes are being made, not from the fighting itself, but from everything orbiting around it. In the late Middle Ages, war is as regular as the changing seasons, and for some people, it's the best business in town. While soldiers bleed on the field, clever merchants supply them with weapons, armor, salted meat, wine, and tents. You imagine yourself selling arrows by the thousand, each one tipped with a neat steel point you ordered from a blacksmith months in advance, knowing a campaign was brewing. Historians still argue whether war truly accelerated commerce or just shuffled wealth around. But to those who mastered the logistics, it didn't matter. Take the armorers of Milan. Their workshops became legendary, selling not only to their own dukes, but to anyone with coin, sometimes both sides of a conflict. And yes, you catch yourself thinking, that's one way to hedge your bets. A quirky fact slips into your mind. During the siege of Calais in 1346, records show a certain baker made a fortune supplying pies to the English army. Pies so popular that officers paid triple the normal price. Imagine betting your livelihood on an army's appetite. You walk with a grizzled merchant who deals in war horses. He tells you he scouts young stallions years before they're needed, then trains them for endurance rather than speed, because knights will pay more for a mount that lasts the entire campaign. He winks and says, the secret to wealth is knowing what they'll run out of first. Then there's the ransom trade. Captured nobles aren't tossed into dungeons for life. They're kept like prized livestock until someone pays up. If you have the resources to hold such a prisoner, the payout can fund an entire estate. One enterprising knight you overhear brags about financing his daughter's wedding from the ransom of a single baron, whose release he delayed just long enough to squeeze an extra chest of silver from the family. Salvage is another war-born gold mine. After a battle, scavengers pick through abandoned camps, pulling coins from the pockets of the fallen, stripping armor, even melting down dented swords. You picture the eerie silence after the fighting, smoke rising, crows circling, and figures in ragged cloaks dragging away shields like trophies. It's grim, yes, but in this world, nothing of value goes to waste. Back in town, you slip into a tavern where a group of armorers, horse traders, and cloth merchants are laughing over mugs of ale. They're the quiet victors of the war, the ones who profited without lifting a sword. One tells a joke about how the safest place in battle is the counting room, and they all roar with approval. You note that none of them look eager to see peace any time soon. By nightfall, you understand something uncomfortably clear. In the Middle Ages, war doesn't just destroy, it redistributes. If you can guess where the next campaign will strike, if you can stockpile the right goods and keep your political alliances tidy, war can be your ticket to riches. And unlike the soldiers, you don't even need to survive the battlefield, just the competition. You pass through the city gates and instantly smell it, warm, yeasty, and a little sweet, curling in thin ribbons over the cool afternoon air. The bakery on the corner is doing a roaring trade, but not with ordinary loaves. No, these are spiced cakes, flecked with something dark and fragrant, tiny luxuries most townsfolk rarely taste. You watch a boy run out clutching one in both hands like a holy relic, eyes wide at his own fortune. The baker grins when you ask what's in them. He lowers his voice, even though the street is loud with cartwheels and gossip. Cinnamon, brought from Ceylon through Venice, priced high enough to make a man's purse noticeably heavier with every sale. In the late Middle Ages, if you can move goods across long distances, especially from the exotic East, you can rise from obscurity to opulence. Ships become floating treasure chests holding pepper, saffron, silk, sugar, and porcelain, all of them worth more than their weight in silver once they reach the right port. You picture yourself standing on a creaking deck, the air thick with mingled scents of spice and tar, calculating the profit from each crate in the hold, while the ship's mast groans above you. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you're already thinking about how much of this will be yours after the voyage. The water routes are the lifeblood of this world. Venetian galleys, Genoese carracks, Catalan merchant cogs, they crisscross the Mediterranean like threads in an enormous, ever-shifting web. Some ports are open to all, but others are locked down tight, their gates guarded by tariffs so high they can sink an unprepared trader. Historians still argue whether the spice craze was truly driven by the need to preserve and flavor food, or whether it was more about showing off. After all, pepper can disguise the taste of meat salted for months, but it can't hide the gleam in a nobleman's eye when he sprinkles cinnamon into a sauce in front of guests. A quirky tidbit you pick up at a dockside tavern. Nutmeg is believed by many to ward off the plague. Merchants sell tiny pomanders, little perforated balls filled with nutmeg or cloves, at outrageous prices. You imagine the satisfaction of the trader who happened to buy a bulk shipment right before that rumor took off. People wear them dangling from chains, sniffing them anxiously in crowded streets, convinced they're protected. If belief alone could keep you safe, they'd be invincible. But moving these goods isn't simply about getting them from point A to point B. You have to know the choke points, the Bosporus, where Constantinople's authorities collect their dues, the Straits of Gibraltar, where both pirates and patrols lie in wait. The overland caravan routes through the Levant, where tolls and protection fees bleed traders dry. Step wrong, and your cargo is taxed into oblivion. Step right, and you might sail home with profits that could buy a manor. One evening, you walk with a Venetian spice dealer along the Grand Canal. He points to the moored ships with casual pride. "Those 3 are mine," he says, "but I've never set foot on them during a voyage." He doesn't need to. The richest merchants invest in fleets, hire captains they trust, and take a share from dozens of voyages at once. It's not the one big score, he tells you with a wink. It's the steady trickle of coin that drowns you in silver. You wonder if you could ever trust others with so much, but you see his ledger, dozens of voyages bringing back steady returns, and it makes a convincing argument. There's another side to all of this, the shadow commerce of smuggling. Not every barrel on a ship's manifest matches what's in the hold. Cloth hides casks of wine, sacks of grain, concealed jars of saffron. Bribery oils the system. Customs officials forget to check certain crates. And a week later, the same goods appear untaxed and twice the price in another market. You find yourself on the edge of a conversation between 2 captains about a shipment of silk that fell off the manifest in Ragusa and somehow resurfaced in Pisa, earning a profit that wouldn't fit in a single chest. As you follow the trade routes in your mind, you see the patterns. Buy low where something is common. Sell high where it's rare. The idea sounds simple enough, until you factor in storms that can scatter ships across the sea. Pirates who strip cargo down to the nails, rival merchants who undercut prices, and city-states that suddenly change their tax laws after a political spat. Every voyage is a gamble, but for the successful, the payout isn't just wealth, it's influence. A rich spice merchant can lend to nobles, fund churches, or even sway councils. Inside a cavernous warehouse in Pisa, bales of silk are stacked like sleeping animals, each wrapped in waxed cloth to keep the damp out. The overseer lets you flip through a ledger so thick it could serve as a doorstop. Columns of numbers and cryptic marks make your eyes blur, but the pattern is there. Pepper from Alexandria, sold in Venice for twice the price. Silk from Damascus, tripled in value by the time it reaches Bruges. He shows you another page, a list of expected arrivals. If even half of them come in safely, he says, it'll be enough to cover the year's expenses with gold left over to expand his fleet. You begin to notice that the most successful traders are also the most informed. They cultivate networks, diplomats, sailors, innkeepers, even dockside thieves, anyone who can whisper where prices are about to spike or which port is quietly waiving duties this month. Sometimes the real treasure isn't in the hold at all. It's in the letter that arrives a week before your competitors hear the same news. Walking back toward your inn that night, you pass the bakery again. The smell of cinnamon is still in the air, sweet and slightly sharp, the kind that makes you think of warmth, even as the wind bites your cheeks. You realize that long-distance trade is less about daring voyages and more about foresight, knowing who wants what, where, and when. The rich merchants of this age aren't just sailors or shopkeepers. They're part gambler, part diplomat, part mathematician. And maybe, if you can keep your cargo dry, your partners loyal, and your enemies guessing, you too can turn cinnamon into castles. The morning mist hangs low over the valley, softening the sharp outlines of castle walls and tiled rooftops as you ride in under the portcullis. Your horse's hooves clop against cobblestones still slick from the dew. Ahead, through the narrow street, you catch glimpses of fine embroidery in a shop window, thread that glimmers faintly even in the pale light. Not gold, but close. This is Italian silk, woven with such skill that wealthy townsfolk will part with an entire month's wages for a single length. You lean closer, running your fingers over the weave, and the shopkeeper pounces. "From Lucca," she says proudly, as if you've just touched a treasure brought down from the heavens. In the late Middle Ages, textile workshops are more than just places where cloth gets made. They're miniature kingdoms, each one ruled by a master weaver and guarded by the laws of a guild. If long-distance spice merchants control the flavor of the age, the textile guilds control its fashion and, just as importantly, its flow of wealth. You wander deeper into the quarter, where the air is full of clattering looms, rhythmic like rain on a roof. The smell is warm and slightly oily from the dyes. Madder root for reds, woad for blues, weld for yellows. A guild official stops you at a corner. His robes are trimmed with fur, but it's the heavy chain around his neck, a sign of office, that really catches your eye. He launches into a brisk explanation. No one can weave, dye, or sell certain fabrics here without the guild's approval. Break the rules, and you risk fines, confiscation, or being banned from the trade entirely. Historians still argue whether these rules protected craftsmanship or simply protected the profits of those already in power. A quirky tidbit. In some cities, guild inspectors carry tiny brass stamps, each with a unique symbol. When a bolt of cloth passes inspection, they press the stamp into a corner, like signing up painting. Without that mark, the cloth can't legally be sold in the market. You can almost imagine the drama when a wealthy client's order fails inspection. There's probably a trail of whispered complaints from dyers to weavers to merchants until someone quietly pays to overlook the problem. Inside a workshop, you watch an apprentice feed fine thread through the heddles of a loom. His fingers move quickly, almost without looking, like a musician who knows every note by heart. The master weaver explains that apprentices start young, sometimes at 12, and train for years before they're allowed to sell work under their own name. The pay at first is miserable, but for those who endure, the rewards can be staggering. Guild masters can set prices, control supply, and even influence city politics. The dyeing yards are another world entirely. Large vats of steaming liquid bubble like witches' cauldrons, each one steeping cloth in color. You hold a strip of silk dyed with cochineal red, so rich it seems to hum under the light. A dyer grins at your awe. "Imported from far-off lands," he says, "and worth its weight in gold. More if the caravan was attacked along the way." You remember from earlier journeys that some of these dye sources, like indigo, are guarded secrets. Traders have been known to spread false rumors about where they're found just to throw off competitors. The guild hall itself is part office, part fortress. Heavy oak doors, high windows, and a hall where long tables are piled with ledgers and contracts. One corner is reserved for disputes. Merchants arguing over late deliveries, customers complaining about flaws, weavers defending their work against accusations of shoddy craftsmanship. The guild officers mediate, record fines, and occasionally hand down rulings that ruin reputations. You realize quickly that money isn't the only currency here. Prestige is just as valuable and just as fragile. As you explore, you notice that some guild members live in houses far grander than the local minor nobility. Tall windows, carved door frames, private gardens. They host banquets where the food is just an excuse for guests to admire the hangings and tapestries draped over every surface. One particularly proud guild master leads you into a hall entirely covered in a hunting scene woven from silk and gold thread. It took 3 years to complete, he says, and the buyer, a duke, paid enough to build an entire new wing on his house. Yet not everyone in the textile trade makes a fortune. Outside the guild-controlled streets, poorer weavers work in cramped rooms, producing rougher cloth for the masses. They sell directly in open-air markets, hoping to catch customers who can't afford the guild's premium prices. Some save for years to join the guild themselves, buying their way in with a masterpiece sample to prove their skill. Others, unable to break into the system, remain on the fringes, their work undercutting prices but never earning them social status. On market day, you wander between stalls where bolts of fabric are displayed like treasure. Merchants haggle loudly, but the real negotiations happen in quiet corners over cups of watered wine. Deals are struck for deliveries months in advance. Wool from English sheep to be woven here, dyed with imported pigments, then sent north again to be sold at a fair. It's a dizzying web of transactions, and you realize that the cloth in your hands may already have a dozen owners before it even reaches the customer who will wear it. One evening, in a smoky tavern near the river, a retired guild master leans across the table and tells you the secret to getting rich in this trade. Control the bottlenecks, he says. If you own the only dye house that can produce a certain color, or the only loom big enough for tapestry work, you can name your price. He chuckles into his cup. And make friends in the council. Rules can be adjusted. By the time you leave the city, your pack is heavier with samples. A strip of deep blue velvet, a square of fine linen, a scrap of brocade so thick it feels like metal under your fingers. You understand now that the textile guilds aren't just about making cloth, they're about making wealth, weaving it as surely as they weave threads on their looms, binding it tight in the hands of those clever enough or ruthless enough to hold on. The salt wind hits your face before you even see the sea. You follow it down a winding track, past weather-beaten cottages with nets hanging like tired spiderwebs, until the view opens up, and there it is, the port. Masts bristle like a forest of bare winter trees, sails furled, hulls creaking gently in the tide. The air is thick with the smell of tar, fish, and faraway lands. Dock workers shout over each other in half a dozen languages, their voices weaving a messy chorus that feels alive with opportunity. This is where fortunes arrive, and where they vanish just as quickly. Ships carry grain, wool, wine, and, more exciting still, things most people in this town have never even heard of. A crate from the Levant might hold spices so pungent they make your eyes water. A barrel from the Baltic could be stuffed with amber, each piece glowing like trapped sunlight. And somewhere, always somewhere, there's a whisper of contraband tucked deep beneath the official cargo. As you walk along the quay, you spot a merchant leaning casually against a post, watching the unloading with an expression halfway between boredom and calculation. He's the sort who makes his living not by lifting crates, but by knowing exactly which crate to buy and which to leave alone. In the late Middle Ages, the best maritime traders were part gambler, part weather forecaster, part politician. The gambling wasn't at the dice table. It was in predicting which goods would fetch the highest price months from now in a market halfway across the continent. Historians still argue whether sea trade was inherently riskier than land caravans. The sea could swallow a fortune in an instant. Storms, piracy, and sudden political blockades could turn a profitable voyage into a disaster. Yet for those who knew the winds, the currents, and the right bribes, maritime trade offered profits land routes could only dream of. There's a quirky fact sailors like to brag about. In some ports, you could buy sea insurance as early as the 14th century. A merchant could pay a fee up front so that if his ship went down, the insurer would cover part of the loss. It wasn't foolproof. Sometimes the insurer vanished before paying, but it was the closest thing to a safety net in an age when your cargo could literally sink before your eyes. Down at the docks, crews are busy shifting bales of English wool destined for Flanders, casks of Bordeaux wine bound for Hanseatic cities, and olive oil from the Mediterranean heading north to be swapped for timber and furs. You pause beside a crate of ceramic jars sealed with wax. The dock foreman grins. "Perfume," he says, tapping one gently, "worth more than silver per ounce. Handle carefully." You can't help imagining the chaos if one of these slips and shatters. Somewhere in a noblewoman's chamber, her dresser would sit bare for months while traders scrambled to replace it. The port is more than just a jumble of goods. It's a human network. You pass a broker in a feathered cap, deep in conversation with a Genoese captain. A few steps later, a group of sailors from the Baltic are trying to teach a French dockhand how to pronounce their word for beer, with much laughter and spitting. And everywhere there are taverns, places where deals are struck over mugs of ale and where a single overheard conversation could make or ruin someone's year. You duck into one, where a map is nailed to the wall and covered in ink marks showing where certain ships were last seen. A trader points to a route skirting the coast of Portugal. "Risky," he mutters, "but if you can make it past the storms this season, the markets in the south are desperate for grain." He scribbles figures on the back of a napkin, the numbers climbing like a greedy tide. Outside, you watch stevedores argue over a manifest, waving parchment as if it's the law itself, which, in a way, it is. Customs officials prowl the docks, checking cargo against taxes owed, but you notice some crates being rolled down side alleys instead of toward the counting house. It's the unspoken truth of port life. Smuggling is as much a part of the economy as legitimate trade. Everyone pretends not to see as long as the right palms are greased. One evening, you stand at the pier's edge staring at a ship about to depart. The crew hauls the gangplank aboard. The sails catch the evening breeze, and the vessel leans into the waves like a horse eager for the race. The merchant beside you watches with quiet intensity. "That's my money out there," he says softly. "If it comes back, I'll double my fortune. If not—" He shrugs, the gesture masking more worry than he'd like to show. Weeks later, when you return to the same port, you spot that ship again. Sails patched, hull scraped, but heavy in the water with its new load. The merchant is all smiles now, and you realize the gamble paid off. Somewhere, buyers are waiting with open purses, and the goods in that hold will ripple through markets far from here, leaving wealth and jealousy in their wake. As you leave the port, the gulls scream overhead, and you catch yourself thinking that the sea is the most unpredictable partner a trader could have. But for those willing to dance with its moods, it can spin gold out of salt water. You can almost smell the ink before you see it. Thick, dark, and faintly metallic. You push open the heavy oak door of a counting house and step into a world where numbers rule the air. No fishy harbor smell here, no dusty grain scent from the market, just the dry tang of parchment and the warm, almost sweet aroma of sealing wax. This is where merchant finance lives and breathes, where fortunes are moved not on wagons or ships, but across ledgers in careful script. At a long table, a clerk hunches over a book as big as a bread loaf, his quills scratching methodically. He doesn't look up when you enter, too busy noting down debts, payments, and promises, like a priest recording sins. The sound is steady and hypnotic, and you realize that this, too, is part of how people got rich in the late Middle Ages, not by moving goods themselves, but by controlling the money that moved them. It's easy to forget, standing here in this quiet room, that medieval finance was not as primitive as some people think. By the 14th century, sophisticated credit networks connected cities hundreds of miles apart. You didn't have to haul your silver from Bruges to Venice. You could walk into a bank in Bruges, deposit it, and get a letter of exchange. Then, in Venice, you could hand over that letter and withdraw your funds, minus a fee that fattened the banker's purse. Historians still argue whether the Italian merchant families, like the Medici, actually invented this method or merely perfected it from older Arab and Byzantine practices. A quirky fact? Some of these letters were so cryptic that only the issuing bank's staff could decipher them, using personal ciphers to deter forgers. Imagine if your modern ATM receipt came printed in code, and only your bank knew how to read it. The merchant class loved this new magic. Suddenly, they could invest in ventures far from home without carrying a sack of coins that screamed, "Rob me!" to every highwayman on the road. A wool trader in London could finance a spice shipment from Alexandria without ever leaving England. His profit might take months or years to come back, but when it did, it could be enough to buy him not just a bigger warehouse, but a title. Over in a corner, you watch a meeting between two men, one dressed plainly, but with the air of someone used to giving orders, the other more richly clothed, but visibly nervous. The plain man is the financier. The other is a merchant about to embark on a voyage. They speak in low tones, weighing risks like chefs weighing spices. If the merchant's voyage fails, the financier might lose everything invested. But if it succeeds, half the profit, remember? The financier says, and the merchant nods. Deals like this were common. Shared risk, shared reward. It was an early form of venture capitalism, centuries before anyone thought to give it such a flashy name. You run your fingers along a row of locked iron boxes lining the wall. Inside are gold florins, silver groschen, and the occasional jewel accepted as collateral. But most of the wealth in this room doesn't exist in physical form. It's ink in ledgers, promises on parchment. It's wealth that can vanish with a pen stroke or multiply the same way. Not everyone trusted this paper-thin magic. There are stories of nobles demanding to see their wealth in coin before believing it was real. One Flemish count is said to have ordered his bankers to fill his great hall with silver coins just so he could walk barefoot through them, an indulgence part pleasure, part paranoia. You glance at a small side table where a pile of wax seals rests like little red candies. Every important agreement ends with the warm press of one of these seals, part identity check, part ceremony. There's something comforting about that tactile final step, as if Melting wax can turn an airy promise into something you can hold. But it's not all serene calculation in the counting house. You've heard the murmurs about financiers who bankroll both sides of a conflict or quietly manipulate grain prices by funding storage and withholding. Wealth here is built as much on timing and leverage as on honest trade. The biggest players, often families rather than individuals, build webs of influence that stretch from royal courts to humble market stalls. And when they decide to tug a thread, entire economies can twitch. A clerk passes you, arms loaded with rolled-up ledgers. The parchment edges are smudged from years of hands leafing through them. He nearly drops one, and for a second you imagine the ink blurring, numbers smearing into nonsense, fortunes evaporating in the blink of an eye. That's the fragility of wealth here. It's solid until it isn't. Outside, the sun is dipping low, casting long shadows across the cobbled street. You step out and see a merchant handing a sealed pouch to a courier on horseback. That pouch might contain instructions that will redirect ships, alter investments, or quietly ruin a rival. In this world, news and credit move faster than ships, and faster still than trust. You walk away with the sense that this quiet, ink-stained business is every bit as thrilling and dangerous as the storm-tossed sea. Because in the late Middle Ages, a fortune could be built without leaving this very street, and it could be lost here just as easily. You follow the sound of hammering before you even know where you're going. It's a steady metallic rhythm, tap, tap, clang, that seems to pulse in the air like a heartbeat. Then you see it, a low stone building with its heavy wooden shutters wide open. Inside, men stand over anvils, their sleeves rolled up, their forearms slick with sweat, their faces lit by the soft orange glow of a nearby furnace. The air is thick with the smell of hot metal and singed wood, and the occasional hiss of water cooling a glowing ingot punctuates the steady hammer music. You've found a mint, not the leafy green plant kind, but the place where money itself is born. Here, in the late Middle Ages, controlling a mint is like having a cheat code to wealth, if you can be trusted with it, or in the case of a few ambitious rulers, if you can get away with bending the rules a little. A worker pulls a fresh coin blank from a tray still warm to the touch and places it carefully on a carved die. Another man swings a hammer down in one precise stroke, stamping the ruler's face into the metal. The image is sharp and regal, a miniature announcement of authority. But here's the thing. The ruler's portrait isn't just decorative, it's a silent contract. It tells everyone that this coin has the ruler's guarantee of value. Mainstream historical fact? By the 14th and 15th centuries, European monarchs often reserved the right to mint coins exclusively for themselves or for certain chartered cities. It wasn't just about making money, it was about controlling trust. If you couldn't trust the coin, you couldn't trust the market. A quirky tidbit you might like. Some rulers had their coins minted deliberately smaller than older issues, but kept the same face value, pocketing the extra silver or gold. It was called debasement, and while it fattened treasuries in the short term, it often backfired when merchants demanded more coins for the same goods. Imagine paying for your coffee one day with one coin, then finding you need two the next. Except your coffee is a barrel of wine, and it's taken a month to get here from Bordeaux. Historians still argue whether the mints of certain cities like Florence or Lubeck were truly models of consistency, or if they quietly played with purity levels whenever times got tight. Florence, famous for its gold florin, swore up and down that its coins were the purest in Europe. But there are a few suspicious test results from surviving coins that make numismatists raise an eyebrow. In the far corner, a boy no older than 12 turns a heavy crank, feeding a strip of metal through a rolling mill to even out its thickness. His hands are black with soot, but his eyes are bright. He knows that learning the mint trade can mean steady work for life. Not glamorous, maybe, but safe compared to sailing to the Levant or guarding caravans through bandit country. You edge closer to a bench where an older man is weighing coins on a small, delicate balance. He taps one, listening for a pure ring. A duller sound could mean the coin is alloyed with base metals. In a world before chemical assays, your ears and eyes are your testing kit. Merchants on the road did this too. Bite a coin, flick it, watch how it spins. Trust, but verify. Sometimes mints were the quiet power behind a city's rise. Lübeck, at the heart of the Hanseatic League, didn't just trade in goods, it made sure its coins were accepted across northern Europe. That trust meant Lübeck's merchants could walk into markets in Riga or Bruges and do business without haggling over exchange rates. Outside the mint, you hear the chatter of traders waiting to pick up freshly struck coins. Some will be used to pay crews, others to settle debts, still others to buy cargo that will sail away tomorrow. Money here isn't just a medium, it's a passport. The right coins open doors, the wrong ones close them. One merchant glances around before slipping a small pouch to a mint official. A bribe? Possibly. The official tucks it away without a word. Maybe it's payment for jumping the queue. Maybe it's to ensure that the merchant's coins are struck just a touch heavier than standard. Tiny edges in weight and purity can mean huge gains when you're dealing in bulk. The sun is setting now, and the light outside the mint glows warm and red. The workers keep at it, coin after coin, hammer stroke after hammer stroke. Watching them, you realize that in the late Middle Ages, wealth could be built by putting ships to sea or by putting faces on coins. Either way, someone had to trust the image stamped into the metal, and someone had to make sure that trust was worth more than the gold itself. You step back into the cool evening air, the faint clink of coins echoing in your ears. You don't have to be a ruler to profit from the mint, but it certainly helps. You smell the wax before you see the workshop. It's a warm, honeyed scent, mingled with the sharper tang of parchment and the faint whiff of soot from a candle stub. The building is small, almost cramped, but the air inside hums with quiet concentration. A man in a dark wool robe hunches over a desk, his quill scratching across the page in smooth, deliberate strokes. You hear the faint whisper of the goose feather against vellum, and you realize he's not just writing. He's making history, one contract at a time. You've stepped into the world of medieval banking, but not the public, bustling counting house of a merchant family like the Medici. This is more private, more intimate. The office of a notary or a moneylender, the kind of place where wealth is quietly built on promises, signatures, and sealed agreements. Your eyes wander to the shelves stacked with scrolls and bound volumes. Each one contains someone's future. A debt agreement, a property lease, a will, a merchant's investment in a ship bound for Alexandria. In the late Middle Ages, paper, or rather parchment, could be worth more than gold if it contained the right words. Mainstream historical fact: By the 14th century, written contracts had become essential for large-scale trade. Italian city-states like Florence, Venice, and Genoa perfected the use of bills of exchange, documents that allowed merchants to move money across borders without physically hauling chests of coins. This meant less risk from bandits and pirates and more trust between far-flung partners. A quirky tidbit. In some cities, notaries had such a monopoly on legal document making that even illiterate peasants would have to hire one just to make a simple agreement, like promising to pay for a cow over 6 months. And because the notary wrote it in elaborate Latin, both sides might still need him to read it back whenever questions arose. Imagine needing a lawyer every time you bought a second-hand bicycle, though here the stakes were usually much higher. Historians still argue whether the spread of written financial instruments created more equality or simply gave the wealthy an even stronger grip on commerce. Some point to small traders who used contracts to expand beyond their local markets. Others note that the most complex deals were still dominated by a few elite families who could afford the best legal minds. The man at the desk, his hair graying at the temples, pauses to melt a stick of sealing wax over a candle. He drips it onto the edge of a folded parchment and presses a metal seal into it, leaving a crisp impression of a heraldic device. This isn't just decoration. The seal is the medieval equivalent of a PIN code, and a notarized signature rolled into one. If it's broken, the document is suspect. You lean closer to a stack of promissory notes bound with ribbon. The handwriting varies. Different clients, different debts. But the amounts make your eyebrows climb. 100 florins here, 50 there, sometimes even more. That's enough to buy multiple houses in a city suburb or an entire shipment of wool. And these aren't just static loans. They're investments. A ship might leave Genoa funded by half a dozen such notes, each promising repayment with interest once the cargo sails in a distant port. The notary, ever the multitasker, listens while a merchant recites the terms of a new deal. His quill dances over the page, pausing only to dip in ink. The merchant's hands are busy too, gesturing wildly, explaining how the grain prices in Barcelona have risen and how now is the time to buy. You can see it, the spark in his eyes, the way he's already counting profits before the parchment is dry. Outside the office, the street is quieter than the market square, but people pass by in a steady stream. Apprentices running errands, clerics deep in thought, a woman carrying a basket of fresh bread. Every so often, someone steps inside with a purposeful look and leaves lighter of step. Deals made here ripple out into the city, touching markets, workshops, even the mints you visited earlier. A young apprentice sweeps the floor, careful not to disturb the stacks of parchment. He's probably learning the trade, how to calculate interest, how to word a contract so that it binds without offending, how to keep ledgers so neat that even a decade later a transaction can be traced coin by coin. It's not glamorous work, but in a world where illiteracy is common, the ability to write and to write contracts is a superpower. And that's the thing. In the late Middle Ages, banking wasn't only about holding money. It was about recording promises and creating systems so complex that they could leap across borders and decades. The richest people in this business didn't have to swing a hammer or sail a ship. They sat at desks like this one, making sure that other people's ventures and debts kept their own coffers full. As the sun dips low, the room glows in the warm light of candles. The quill scratches on, sealing wax strips, and the slow, steady creation of wealth continues. Outside, the world might measure fortune in gold coins, but in here, it's measured in words, seals, and signatures. The salt hits your nose before the city even comes into view. A sharp, briny tang carried inland by the wind. The road beneath your boots is lined with wheel ruts, worn deep by years of heavy carts hauling goods toward the docks. You can already hear the faint creak of rigging, the slap of waves against hulls, and the muffled shouts of sailors. By the time you crest the hill, there it is, a harbor bristling with masts, their wooden poles stabbing the sky like a forest turned inside out. You step down toward the waterfront, weaving past a tangle of fishmongers, porters, and errand boys. The air hums with languages, Italian, Arabic, Greek, and a half-dozen others you can't place. This isn't just a fishing town. This is a medieval port, the beating heart of a trade empire, where fortunes are loaded and unloaded every single day. Mainstream historical fact? By the late Middle Ages, ports like Venice, Genoa, and Bruges were hubs of international trade. Ships arrived packed with spices, silks, dyes, and metals, and departed loaded with wool, wine, glass, and timber. The money flowing through these harbors made them some of the richest places on earth. You push past a man shouting about a shipment of saffron, the gold of the spice trade. A single small pouch costs more than some farmers earn in a year. A pair of porters pass you, bent under the weight of a wooden chest bound with iron bands. Judging by how carefully they're moving, it's full of something valuable. Coins, gemstones, or perhaps rare fabrics that will fetch an absurd price in a distant market. A quirky tidbit. Dockside thieves often disguise themselves as port workers, blending in with the chaos to lift whatever they could. Some even made off with entire barrels of wine or sacks of pepper, slipping them onto smaller boats before the ship's purser realized anything was missing. You half expect to see someone right now accidentally walk away with a roll of silk tucked under their cloak. Historians still argue whether ports enriched the average city dweller or just funneled more wealth into the hands of a small merchant elite. For every dock worker who earned a steady wage, there were countless others who lived day to day, their fortunes rising and falling with each season's trade winds. You notice a group gathered near a long, low warehouse. The wooden doors stand open, revealing row after row of goods, sacks of grain, jars of olive oil, crates of pottery from far-off kilns. A merchant in a fur-lined hat inspects a shipment, biting into a piece of dried fruit to test its quality. Beside him, a clerk scribbles notes on a wax tablet, tallying each item before it's loaded onto a cart bound for the market. The ships themselves are marvels. Some are sleek galleys, propelled by rows of oars and used for shorter, faster trips across the Mediterranean. Others are bulky cogs, built for heavy cargo and long voyages across the North Sea. You watch as a crane, powered by a team of men walking inside a giant wooden wheel, swings a massive crate over the deck, lowering it carefully into the hold. Not all the action is above deck. You're told that deep in the ship's bellies, workers stack goods with mathematical precision, making sure the weight is balanced so the vessel won't capsize in rough seas. Salted fish, bundles of wool, barrels of wine, they're all wedged in tight, cushioned with straw and rope. A shout goes up from the waterline as a small boat approaches. It's bringing in a customs official, here to inspect the cargo and collect the port taxes. No ship leaves without paying its dues, and those taxes are a major source of income for the city. The official climbs aboard, ledger in hand, his expression already suggesting he's found something to question. On the pier, you catch sight of a broker arguing with a captain over delivery times. The captain, sunburned and wind-worn, insists that storms delayed them. The broker mutters something about penalties for late arrival. Deals made in these ports aren't always friendly. They're high-stakes negotiations where one wrong word can cost thousands. It's easy to romanticize the sight of ships under full sail, but the truth is, the port is as much a battlefield as any field of war. Only here, the weapons are contracts, coin purses, and the occasional bribe slipped to the right official. The city's richest men rarely set foot on a ship themselves. They stay in grand townhouses, letting hired captains and sailors risk their lives on the high seas. As evening falls, the harbor changes mood. The air cools, the shouts grow fewer, and lanterns flicker to life along the waterfront. The masts sway gently against the darkening sky, and the smell of salt and tar mingles with roasting fish from a nearby tavern. Deals struck today will ripple out across continents, some making men rich, others ending in ruin when a ship fails to return. For now, though, the port rests, gathering its strength for another day of loading, unloading, bargaining, and dreaming of far-off shores. You wake to the rhythmic clang of metal on metal, a sound that cuts through the fog of morning like a hammer splitting stone. The smell follows, thick, acrid, and impossible to ignore: burnt charcoal, molten metal, and the faint tang of oil. You're in the artisan's quarter now, where the city's wealth isn't just imported from far-off shores, but forged, carved, and stitched into existence right here at home. Cobblestone streets twist between workshops, each doorway spilling its own sensory overload. A blacksmith's forge glows like a tiny sun, its light flickering on the soot-blackened face of the man shaping a glowing bar of iron. A few doors down, the rhythmic snip of shears marks the domain of a tailor, fabric scraps piling at his feet. And somewhere overhead, a woodcarver leans out of an open loft window, brushing curls of shavings into the street below. By the late Middle Ages, specialized craft guilds controlled not just the quality of goods, but the very right to make them. Mainstream historical fact: in cities like Paris, London, and Florence, no one could simply declare themselves a goldsmith, weaver, or glassblower without guild approval. Membership meant training, usually as an apprentice for 7 years or more, and only then earning the title of master. You duck into a goldsmith's shop, where tiny tools hang from hooks like surgical instruments. The artisan sits hunched over a bench, coaxing thin strands of gold into a filigree pattern so delicate you half expect it to crumble at a touch. This isn't just decoration, it's currency. Rings, chains, and brooches like these will be sold to wealthy merchants, knights, and the occasional noble passing through town, each piece a portable store of value. A quirky tidbit: some goldsmiths in late medieval Europe doubled as bankers. Their strong boxes, already secure for storing precious metals, became safe havens for coins, jewels, and important documents. If you left a deposit, they'd even give you a written receipt, one of the early forms of paper money. In other words, if you were crafty enough, you could make money twice, once by selling gold, and again by lending it out. Historians still argue whether the guild system truly protected craftsmen or just kept wages high for insiders while locking out newcomers. On one hand, the quality control was unmatched. On the other, innovation often suffered when experiments threatened established methods. You wander onward and find yourself in the leatherworker's lane. Here, hides hang like laundry, tanning in the sun, their pungent scent confirming that this is not the most glamorous trade in town. Workers scrape, stretch, and dye the leather, eventually turning it into everything from sturdy belts to ornate book covers. In the age before synthetic materials, leather meant durability, and customers paid well for it. At the far end of the street, a glassblower's workshop shimmers with heat. Inside, a man turns a glowing blob on the end of a blowpipe, coaxing it into a perfect sphere before twisting it into the graceful curve of a goblet. You can't help but think how absurdly fragile this thing is, and yet in wealthy homes, such glassware is a subtle but powerful way of saying, I can afford to replace it when it breaks. The sounds here are hypnotic. The scrape of files, the tap of hammers, the hiss of quenching metal in water. It's a symphony of skill, each note representing hours of practice, muscle memory, and unspoken tradition. In the weaving hall, sunlight streams through high windows, catching in the fine threads strung across looms. Women and men alike work the pedals and shuttles, turning dyed yarn into patterned cloth. The colors, deep indigo, bright crimson, golden saffron, aren't just pretty. They're coded markers of status. In some cities, sumptuary laws forbid commoners from wearing certain shades or fabrics, so the most expensive bolts are destined only for the wealthy. Everywhere you go, you see the same pattern. Skill transforms raw material into wealth, iron into armor, wool into cloth, sand into glass, and each workshop has its own quiet hierarchy. Apprentices fetching water, journeymen doing the bulk of the labor, masters overseeing every detail. The day grows hotter, and the smell of lunch, fresh bread, roasted onions, something meaty, drifts in from a tavern where workers gather between shifts. The talk is all business, a new dye shipment from the Levant, a shortage of tin, a rumor that the guild might raise dues next year. These aren't idle conversations. They're about survival in a system where your craft is your only ticket to prosperity. As afternoon shadows stretch, you notice a young apprentice outside a cooper's shop, hammering metal hoops onto a barrel. His work is clumsy, the rings uneven, but the master stands nearby, arms crossed, nodding at each correction. Every skill starts here, in repetition and imperfection, until the movements are as natural as breathing. The street winds back toward the market square, and you realize something important. While merchants and ship owners might control the flow of wealth, it's artisans who give that wealth form. Coins by themselves don't clothe you, shelter you, or serve your dinner, but the hands in these workshops make the things that do. And as you leave the quarter, the last thing you hear is the steady tap, tap, tap of a hammer. Proof that someone, somewhere, is turning another ordinary day into something extraordinary, one strike at a time. The air changes before you even see the first pile of parchment. It's drier here, as if the streets themselves are lined with the faint scent of ink and dust. You've reached the intellectual heart of the city, where ideas, just as much as spices or gold, are traded for profit. By the late Middle Ages, knowledge isn't just something scholars hoard in candlelit rooms. It's something you can sell, copy, and package for eager customers. You duck through a low doorway into a scribe's workshop. The room is quiet, except for the scratch-scratch of quills on parchment. Wooden desks are lined in neat rows, each holding stacks of animal skin vellum, jars of ink, and the occasional cup of watered wine to keep the hand steady. The master scribe, a man with ink-stained fingertips and an expression like he's seen every error a beginner can make, doesn't look up as you wander in. His apprentices bend over their work, copying texts with an almost meditative precision. Here's the mainstream historical fact. Before Gutenberg's printing press took over in the mid-15th century, book production in Europe was almost entirely manual. It could take months or even years to produce a single volume, especially if it was illuminated with gold leaf and elaborate illustrations. That meant books were luxury goods, as prized and expensive as jewels. If you knew how to make them, you could get very, very rich. You lean over a desk to watch an apprentice carefully dot the I of a Latin phrase. The letters are tall and angular, each one a miniature work of art. Some margins hold tiny drawings, a rabbit in armor here, a grinning sun there, a quirky tidbit. Medieval scribes sometimes doodled little creatures or jokes in the margins, even in religious texts. It's a reminder that despite the solemnity of the work, human playfulness found a way to sneak in. Beyond the scribes, the parchment makers are just as busy. Thick hides soak in lime water outside, their pale surfaces stretched taut across wooden frames. The smell is strong, enough to make you step back, but the work is precise. The smoother the surface, the higher the price the finished page will fetch. And while the scribes get the glory, parchment makers command steady income. Without their product, not a single word could be copied. Historians still argue whether the expansion of literacy in this period came from a genuine hunger for learning among common people, or was simply the byproduct of merchants and officials needing better records for trade. Either way, the demand for books, contracts, and letters meant scribes rarely lacked work in a prosperous city. You step into a nearby stationer's shop. It's almost like a medieval office supply store, racks of quills, cakes of ink, knives for trimming parchment, even sand to blot wet writing. A merchant is arguing over the price of a ledger book, waving a silk-gloved hand in exasperation. He finally relents. He needs to keep his accounts, and the stationer knows it. In one corner, a young clerk is writing out not a book, but a set of commercial contracts. These are just as valuable as any illuminated manuscript, because they represent goods, ships, and entire fortunes on the move. If you're sharp with numbers and can write clearly, you might find yourself in high demand among the merchant elite. As you wander back into the street, you hear the rhythmic chant of schoolboys reciting Latin declensions. The grammar school sits just beyond the cathedral, run by the clergy. And while most of its students will never be merchants, some will become scribes or lawyers, the middlemen of medieval wealth. Education here is both a privilege and a tool for advancement. You catch sight of a more unusual setup, a small workshop run by an itinerant mapmaker. Rolls of parchment and vellum are covered in hand-painted coastlines, mountain ranges, and fantastical beasts in unexplored seas. For merchants and ship captains, these maps are investments, helping them plan voyages and plot trade routes. For everyone else, they're pieces of art. And if a cartographer is especially talented or creative with unknown lands, his work can command staggering prices. The real money, you realize, isn't always in holding the knowledge yourself, but in controlling who can access it. Guild-like organizations of scribes sometimes limit who gets to copy certain books, just as artisans' guilds guard their craft. That exclusivity inflates value. The rarer a text, the more someone is willing to pay for it. By late afternoon, the sun angles through a window in the scriptorium, catching on flecks of gold leaf in an illuminated capital letter. You watch as a gilder breathes softly over the page, pressing the gold into place with the tip of a brush. It's delicate work, worth its weight in the literal metal. And while this page will end up bound in leather covers, right now it's just a single moment of beauty in a process built on patience. As you step outside, a street performer is reading aloud from a popular romance, one of those chivalric tales about knights rescuing maidens and dueling dragons. A crowd gathers, tossing coins into his cap. You smile. Even without a guild or a workshop, this man has found a way to turn words into income. The evening air smells faintly of ink and drying parchment as you walk away. Behind you, the scribes keep scratching, the parchment makers keep scraping, and somewhere an apprentice pauses to doodle in the margin of a page. In this city, ideas are as much a commodity as grain or wool, fragile, precious, and in the right hands, endlessly profitable. The streets quiet earlier than you expect tonight. Maybe it's the cool air drifting in from the river, or maybe people are home counting their coins. You step onto a narrow lane lined with houses that seem just a little too grand for their surroundings. Timbered facades with intricate carvings, windows glazed with clear glass instead of clouded horn, front doors wide enough to let in barrels without tilting them sideways. This is the neighborhood of the investors, the speculators, the quiet rich. In the late Middle Ages, wealth didn't just come from owning a business or selling goods. It came from making your money work for you. You might buy a share of a merchant's cargo, a corner of a vineyard, or even a right to collect tolls on a bridge. If it brought in steady profit, you'd consider it. You pause outside one such house where a man in a fur-lined robe sits at a desk, quill in hand, going over what looks like a mountain of receipts. His fortune, you hear, comes not from sailing ships, but from funding them. He never risks a storm or pirate raid himself, but when a vessel returns loaded with pepper, silk, or silver, his cut is waiting. That's the mainstream historical fact. By the 14th and 15th centuries, profit-sharing and early forms of investment were already creating fortunes without the investor ever leaving the city. Inside another home, a woman is negotiating with a group of wool merchants. She doesn't own a single sheep, but she owns the warehouse they rent. And she's just raised the rent by a tidy margin. That's the thing about property. It doesn't spoil, it doesn't sink in a storm. And as long as the city grows, it only becomes more valuable. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some of these medieval investors even put money into things like bell casting for cathedrals or commissioning elaborate public fountains. Sure, it was partly for civic pride, but also people remembered who paid for them. It was a kind of branding before logos existed. Historians still argue whether the growth of this money makes money class was a sign of a healthier economy or the start of dangerous wealth inequality. You can see both sides as you pass a beggar hunched against a wall, while just across the street, a banker's servant dumps bread crusts into the gutter. Farther along, you overhear a conversation between two men about the latest craze, investing in mining ventures in the Alps. The risks are high, collapsing tunnels, sudden flooding, but the rewards are too. Silver, copper, and tin are in constant demand for coinage, tools, and luxury goods. One lucky strike could triple or quadruple an investor's wealth. By the time you reach the riverbank, the night has deepened. Boats rock gently against the docks, some loading barrels, others waiting for the tide. You know now that in this world, wealth isn't only about daring voyages or crowded marketplaces. It's about seeing where the flow of goods, land, and labor will be tomorrow, and slipping your own gold into the stream today. Somewhere behind you, a church bell rings the late hour. The city settles, but the ledgers never sleep. Investments will rise or fall with the dawn. The streets fade into a quiet hum, like the low sigh of waves against a harbor wall. The laughter from the taverns is distant now, softened by the fog rolling in from the water. Lamps burn low in windows, their light flickering like warm, slow breaths in the cool night air. You imagine the scribes resting their cramped hands, the merchants turning over in their beds, the ship's crews sleeping on deck under canvas sails. The river, dark and glassy, carries the reflection of a pale moon, its glow stretching in long, gentle ripples. Somewhere, a dog gives one last bark before curling up by a fire. The city feels smaller now, more intimate, as if the walls themselves are leaning in to listen to the quiet. The coins you've seen changing hands, the ships you've watched unload, the parchments and contracts, the slow building of fortunes, they all drift into the same slow rhythm. There is no rush here in the dark, only the steady breathing of a place that has seen countless nights like this. The air is cool and still, carrying the faintest trace of spice from the day's trade. Your steps slow without meaning to, your shoulders dropping as the tension of the crowd and noise slides away. You can almost hear your own heartbeat in time with the creak of a mooring rope and the whisper of wind along the eaves. You find yourself by a quiet square, the cobblestones pale in the moonlight. A fountain trickles softly at its center. You close your eyes and let the sound linger. Water over stone, steady and unhurried. And as the city sleeps, so will you, drifting into dreams where coins clink softly, sails swell in the breeze, and time itself moves like a slow, gentle tide.